How's everybody doing today? I want to welcome you to the second episode of Game Changer Plus with yours truly, Sean Sheppard. Today, we're going to cover guns. And the reason why I want to cover guns is because early on in my Game Changer career, I wondered how law enforcement felt about guns and gun culture since over the past 8, 9, 10 years, the Second Amendment has been such a big deal to a number of segments of our population in the United States of America. And I wanted to dive a little bit into the history of how we got to current day gun culture, gun violence, and how law enforcement feels about gun culture, gun violence. Since, as you all know, I spent thousands of hours listening to and speaking with members of law enforcement through our Game Changer program. So let me take you back. Oh, before we get started, please hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. It helps the channel grow, and it will keep you up to date as to when I upload another video of Game Changer Plus. So let's go all the way back to 1739. Why am I going back to 1739? Because in the state of South Carolina, shortly after what was called the Stono Slave Rebellion, the South Carolina legislature passed what was called the Security Act. They passed it in August of 1739. So this particular bill required all white men to carry firearms to church on Sunday, a time when slaves typically had time off. They had time off because they were being indoctrinated with Christianity. So Sunday is the Lord's day in the Christian faith. Slave owners went to church, and they were kind enough to give slaves the day off. So runaways, epidemics, and tension with Spain had colonists worried about the possibility of a slave revolt. And the legislators feared trouble on Sunday in particular. So let me rewind. This bill required all white men, all, to carry guns to church out of fear. So the Security Act took effect on September 30th, 1739. Don't worry, I'm going to leave the links to this information below the video, so you can check it yourself. In case you're wondering, South Carolina was not the only state to pass that type of legislation. Virginia, over 100 years prior, passed a similar measure over fear of Indian attacks on Sundays. Fear. 52 years later, 52 years after the Act of 1739, after the Security Act was passed, the Second Amendment was born, 1791. I want to share with you what the Second Amendment says. And again, you can go look at this for yourself. It's public knowledge what the Second Amendment says. The Second Amendment states a well-regulated militia being necessary to secure a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I'm going to read that again, since I flubbed it the first time. The Second Amendment states a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A lot of people focus on the last part of the Second Amendment. Shall not be infringed. I got it. Let's focus on the first part of the amendment. A well-regulated militia. Regulated. Let me take you through the Oxford Dictionary definition of regulate. Regulate is a verb. It means to control or maintain the rate of speed so that it properly operates. Synonyms for regulate: control, adjust, manage. Another definition: control or supervise something, especially a company or business activity, which means of rules and regulations. Regulate. Regulate. Not do whatever you want. So we elect officials to govern and make decisions. And a lot of us, myself included, aren't happy with the decisions that many of these elected officials are making on the local, state, and federal level. However, that is their job. And the first part of the Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia. I wanted to share that background information with you, some of the information with you on guns. I don't have the time to go into the history of guns and who created them, who made them, but we do know this. Guns were created to injure or kill. When hunters go hunting, they bring a rifle, they bring a crossbow, whatever they're bringing, they are bringing to kill the animal that they're hunting. Can we at least agree upon that? Hunters use guns to kill, hunters use bow and arrows to kill, hunters use whatever it is they use to kill the animal. Guns are used to kill. Humans use guns to kill. If I gave my dog a gun, chew on it a little bit. Maybe she'd squeeze off around, depending on where she chews, but animals don't know how to use guns. I guess you could teach an ape to use a gun or a chimp to use a gun, but we use guns to kill. I'll go back to how curious I was about members of law enforcement and their view on guns. Because the truth of the matter is, gun culturists, as I will call them, do not represent a majority of people in this country. They don't. If you look back to 1739 and the Security Act and other acts that were passed, those acts were passed by and on the behalf of white men. That's what it said. And a majority of people in this country that are Second Amendment enthusiasts happen to be white. People of color, Black people. Does the Second Amendment mean something to them? Absolutely. Are they rabid about it? That has not been my experience. That has not been my experience in African-American culture. The other cultures that I spend time with on a daily basis, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms and having guns is not part of our culture. It's not a central part of our culture. But I gave you the history so that you can see that it is a central part of white culture. slave owners' culture. And when you go back that far, 300 years, when you plant that seed into a culture and that seed is rooted in fear, and you cultivate that seed, and you water it, and it receives sunshine every day, it grows and it spreads and it becomes part of a culture, a central part of a culture, generally speaking. Well, most of law enforcement is male and white. Across the board, nationwide, 60% of law enforcement is white. All of law enforcement, if you're a patrol officer, carry guns. And years ago, I was very, very surprised to hear members of law enforcement say that less guns in our society make our society safer. That cop said that. All of them. And where they're coming from, if you can understand this, less guns on the street makes them safer. All the men and women in law enforcement who are doing their jobs honorably or dishonorably, they all want to go home at night. They're making traffic stops during the day. They don't know who's in that car or what's in that car. They're making traffic stops at night. They don't know who's in that car or what's in that car. And our nation and the gun culture that is pervasive in our nation has gotten to the point where we've become an extremely violent country in every corner of this country. So again, I was surprised to hear members of law enforcement talk about their desire and their belief for less guns, and that less guns in our country make them safer while they're doing their job and make us citizens safer. Now, there are some people that believe an armed society is a polite society. I've heard that. I've heard Joe Rogan say it. That's one line of thinking. If I'm armed and you're armed, there'll be less stuff popping off. I see a lot of people armed in our country. I don't see less stuff popping off. A lot of people, thousands of people each year are dying due to gun violence. So I want to give you some proof that law enforcement collectively feels like there should be something done to curb gun violence. We have a formal relationship with an organization called the Major City Chiefs Association. Okay? The Major City Chiefs Association is comprised of 79 of the largest cities in the United States and Canada. 70 of those agencies are in the United States. 9 of them are in Canada. And they believe enough in what we've done through Game Changer to partner with us, where they want to be as helpful as possible to introduce us to chiefs within their association across the country who happen to be chiefs of the largest law enforcement agencies in the country, so that we can be of assistance to them in bringing together law enforcement and community residents to discuss problems and devise solutions together. There's an educational component to it. There's trust building, there's communication. It's what we should be doing, not just between law enforcement and community residents. It's what we should be doing across the country as fellow citizens. Now, I'm going to give you the opportunity to go to the Major City Chiefs Association website, and you can check out for yourself all the cities and the states that have agencies that are part of this association. But let me get back to their stance on guns. So it just so happens that the Major City Chiefs Association supports gun regulation. Regulation, part of the Second Amendment. So I want to share with you what they are calling for. And they did this back in 2018. So this is not new news that I'm sharing, but it's new to you because for whatever reason, none of the major media outlets covered the fact that this organization, representative of the 70 largest police departments in the country, police and sheriff, are calling for gun reform due to what they see as first responders as being a major problem in the safety of this country and the well-being of this country. So let me share with you what they're calling for. I want to read. Adopted by a vote of chiefs at their meeting, the new policy statement includes calling on Congress to, quote, adopt a universal background check for all gun sales and transfers. That's number one. Number two, expand screening for prohibited buyers to include persons with violent mental health history. That's number two. Number three, seek red flag measures to prevent guns from reaching persons who threaten violence and murder. And lastly, urge legislation that permits court orders barring gun purchases in domestic violence cases. I'm going to leave this link below for you to check out. But I think it's very important to share with you and for the folks that back the blue. What do I mean by back the blue? Back the blue, to me, is a statement made by people who generally feel that they support law enforcement no matter what they do. That's who the back the blue crowd is to me. The back the blue crowd that supports law enforcement also happens to be the Second Amendment crowd. Predominantly white Americans. So to them, I asked the question, can you back the blue to the point where they're calling for gun reform? Do you back them that much? I happen to agree with them. But even if I didn't agree with them, I'd at least take some time to think and reflect on the fact that these are the people who are on the front lines every day, out in the streets and in rural areas, dealing with criminals and gun violence every day. They're our first responders. And how they feel about guns means something to me, especially since many of them, like I told you, many of them are Second Amendment enthusiasts as well. When you take that whole big picture and you look at the demographics involved, it really is sobering to hear that the people in that profession, who generally speaking are Second Amendment enthusiasts. I haven't met a member of law enforcement that doesn't have their own personal guns too. black, white, pink, and everything in between. They all have guns on a personal level, in addition to their service revolver that they carry with them on the job. That segment of our population feels like our elected officials on the federal level need to do something about gun violence in this country. And who better to speak about it than those men and women who show up to scenes where, for example, a sergeant shared with us several years ago that she walked into a house and saw an infant shot in the face. Now, she was telling us that story as a function of a mental health conversation that we were having. And we're going to get into mental health deep here on Game Changer Plus. And what she was saying was, I've seen a baby shot in the face. I can't unsee that. That image will stick with her for the rest of her life. Those are her words, not mine. So imagine all the other things that they see and also what they're subjected to. They're subjected to gunfire. Now, I understand that there are people who don't feel comfortable with them being armed and we, the people, not being armed. I get that. We can have that discussion. We can have that discussion. I'll listen to that. I can understand those concerns. But it's interesting. Several months ago, I went to Cuba. Never been there before. As a bucket list trip that I took. Now, Cuba has a lot of problems, government and otherwise. But that doesn't mean that a country with severe problems can't have decent ideas. Now, what I'm about to say will never happen in this country, but guns are illegal in Cuba. Completely illegal. And before I went there, I spoke to people who were native Cubans. You know what they told me? Safe there. You don't have to worry about anything. I said, really? Yeah, it's safe. You can walk around at night and you'll be fine. And where I was staying was very close to Havana, close enough for me to 2.5 miles. I could walk from my hotel to Havana Vieja. And no matter what time of night, there were police officers along my path, and I felt completely safe I saw women walking at night by themselves. Nobody had guns. Guns are illegal. Are there people with guns in Cuba that have them illegally? I'm sure there are. But the penalty in Cuba for getting caught with an illegal gun, you may not see your family again. You may not see them again. Is it worth the risk? So again, I'm not saying that that's ever going to happen in the United States. It won't. But the polite society, folks, that is one way to ensure a polite society. Make having guns attached to so severe a penalty that the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So I wanted to share with you what law enforcement thought and thinks about guns, the history of guns. And I personally feel like that Security Act is a perfectly plausible reason that explains today's current day gun culture. It started out of fear in the white community. White slave owners were in fear of slaves rebelling. Black people wanting their freedom. Started in South Carolina. Now, whether you agree with me or not, I'm fine with either. Share your thoughts with me. But you will see a theme with all of these Game Changer Plus videos, more or less. Because as much as people don't want to admit it, a lot of what's taking place in our country as it relates to law enforcement, gun violence, there is absolutely a racial component to it because that's the roots of this country. So I'm not going to get in front of you and be disingenuous and sugarcoat and dance around the fact that this is how our country started. And if you want to understand what's going on today, you kind of have to look back at what happened yesterday. And I can't stress enough really how important it is, how sobering it is, how profound it is that a profession that for so long was only open to white males who are Second Amendment enthusiasts and passed legislation to carry guns on Sundays in church, that profession is calling on Congress to act because the gun violence in this country has gotten out of control. This isn't about politics. I didn't say anything about Democrats or Republicans. I don't care about those people. I'm talking about quality of life for you, for me, your kids, your grandkids. That's all I'm talking about. We live in a dangerous society, man. You can go to a country western concert in Vegas and get gunned down by a mass shooter. You can be in the inner city and get gunned down due to gun violence. You could be at the mall. You could be at the state fair. You could be in a pizza place. Is that the society that you want to live in? It's not the society I want to live in. And I own a gun. It's probably going to be news to my mom. I own a gun that stays in my house. I don't need to carry it outside. Home security. Not security because I'm afraid to go outside and in society. And I need to carry this thing with me. I understand those that want to do it. I'm just bringing you some information, some factual information about how law enforcement feels, how they've shared those sentiments during game changer training events and official statements from the largest law enforcement association on the national level that represents the largest law enforcement agencies around the country, in red states, in blue states, in cities governed by red mayors and blue mayors. And just so you know, how chiefs of police are typically selected, they're selected by the mayor. So the mayor, more often than not, I don't see why they wouldn't, the mayor is going to appoint a chief of police whose views are most in line with his or hers. Republican or Democrat mayor. And if you go to the Major City Chiefs Association website, you will see cities governed by Democratic mayors and Republican mayors. And they all came together, took a vote, and made that statement. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Give me some feedback. Your comments in YouTube, they're always appreciated. I'm going to start to accumulate questions that you all may have, and I'm going to do a couple of Game Changer Plus episodes where I'm just answering questions. Questions about law enforcement, what I've experienced with them over the last 6+ years, what I've heard from them, the conversations that I've had with them, the information and knowledge that they've shared with me, and how we, the people, are feeling. Because as you know, I spent an equal amount of time with residents who have been in those rooms having conversations with law enforcement about problems and devising solutions together. So one last time, please hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you next time.